action, again, all within a 1-year timeline. As chair of the Owasso Chamber, I report to you that our chamber's business model changed dramatically in 2020. Traditionally, we perform our job by bringing people together for advocating, educating, training, networking, and social gatherings. But in-person meetings were not possible during the pandemic. But the importance of the chamber has never been greater. To remain relevant and provide timely information to our business community, we had to adapt to a new form of electronic communication. And like many of you, we became very acquainted with Zoom. It was a good thing because we went 5 months without an in-person meeting. We utilized the Zoom format for monthly meetings, legislative briefings, focus groups, and also to provide multiple links for delivering government updates and guidance on COVID-19 related matters. Fortunately for us, the Owasso Chamber retained its relevancy during this dreaded pandemic. In conclusion, I want to extend my sincere appreciation to all of those frontline responders, the doctors, the nurses, the healthcare personnel, emergency responders, education officials, and teachers at all levels for your dedicated service to not only our city, the county, but the state. And additionally, I want to extend my sincere thank you to the members of the Chamber Board of Directors, the individuals who comprise our wonderful Ambassadors Committee, our outstanding staff, and most importantly, to our members and sponsors for your continued involvement and investment. Because simply without you, there is no chamber. Now, believe it or not, it's time for the passing of the gavel. This is going to be another first, so it's very exciting. It will be the electronic passing of our traditional chamber gavel. I'm passing this to the chair of the Owasso Chamber for 2021, the founder of Eagle Ops Foundation, Mr. Jonathan Shepard. Jonathan?
Paula, this is Gary, and to everyone, thank you for your words. COVID has reared its ugly head again in the way that our 2021 chair has been diagnosed with COVID late last week. Thought that he would be able to be with us today, but he just isn't feeling well. So Jonathan Shepard, on your behalf, I'm going to read the presentation that has been prepared, your presentation, and I'm going to deliver it on your behalf. I hope I do it justice. So this is Jonathan's presentation to the membership. It starts, thank you for your kind introduction, Dr. William, and allow me to say thank you for serving as the 2020 chair of the Owasso Chamber, for serving 4 years on the executive committee and 7 consecutive years as a member of the Chamber Board of Directors. You are a dedicated chamber servant. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to serve as a 2021 chair of the Owasso Chamber of Commerce. 2020 was a very challenging year for all businesses, the chamber included. While I am actually ending my first quarter as chair, I can attest that our chamber and business community has not yet returned to a normal business routine. Today's webinar is a great example. However, we are getting closer. It looks like by June 1st, most of our meetings will be live, and hopefully we can return to a full attendance. I would like to share my 7 goals for 2021. They are very straightforward. 1, increase our membership base by 100 new members. A growing membership is a foundation to a successful chamber. 2, COVID-19 has forced people to stay inside. This year, we need to reach out to our existing members and encourage in-person participation. We have stellar facilities at Tulsa Tech, quality monthly membership meetings, an outstanding legislative affairs luncheon series, and an exceptional Leadership Owasso program. Networking, education, and training are core offerings of our chamber. 3, advocate for legislation that positively impacts business and industry. We are, after all, a chamber of commerce. 4, continue to facilitate and advance relationships between the chamber, city government, school administration, and our county, state, and federal officials. 5, remain an active participant in the One Voice Regional Coalition and support concepts of regionalism. 6, partner with Chelsea Levo Ferry and our regional economic development associates to maintain and expand quality jobs, workforce development, and quality of life initiatives. And number 7, as we have been doing for the past 18 years, we must remain a strong advocate for completing the 6th laning of US 169 from I-244 north to Highway 20. First and foremost, this is a safety issue. If a federal comprehensive infrastructure plan is adopted this year, our long-term transportation project must be funded immediately, fully, with placement on ODOT's 8-year plan. Those are my goals. Grow the chamber, create and maintain quality jobs, advocate for quality legislation, support regionalism, and fully expand US 169 to Highway 20. I want to thank the Chamber Board for their support and guidance, and to all the chambers for investing in the Owasso Chamber. Thank you. I was pleased to present that on behalf of the chairman's, on his behalf, Jonathan Shepard, and say thank you, Jonathan, and we hope you recover quickly from that dreaded virus. So thank you again. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome the 2020 chair of the chamber. Oops, I've already done this. Sorry. I accepted the gavel. Jonathan got me off of that, off track a little bit. Gary, to begin our awards presentation, I'm proud to welcome current board member and former chair of the Owasso Chamber and Chief Communication and Economic Development Officer for Tulsa Tech, Mr. Tony Heberlin. Tony.
Hi. Gary, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, Tony.
Good. We're just trying to figure out technology here.
Oh, you look great, man. You're traveling.
Well, thank you. I am traveling, but I did want to present this award because it is very meaningful to me. As many of you know, my wife fell ill a couple of years ago, and because of a couple of operations in Owasso, we are truly blessed. I am pleased to announce that we have 2 award-winning hospitals serving the medical needs of our citizens, Bailey Medical Center and Ascension St. John. They have each played a critical role in administering healthcare services during the coronavirus pandemic. Today, we express our sincere appreciation to all hospital personnel in Owasso. That includes doctors, nurses, supply chain employees, technicians, receptionists, clerical workers, service personnel, hospital volunteers, and administrators. Collectively, you were the front line in making initial contact, testing, identifying, and treating patients who acquired the dreaded virus. You provided professional and compassionate care so many people in need of medical attention. Hospital workers have been the unsung heroes during the past year. They have experienced stress, anxiety, loneliness, and burnout. We also realize they have put their lives on the line every day to serve the public. In recognition of the valiant efforts of our hospital workers, the Owasso Chamber of Commerce is proud to present its Community Service Award to Bailey Medical Center and Ascension St. John. Thank you for your outstanding service. Back to you, Gary.
Tony, that's a great award presentation. And I think we all can totally and sincerely say thank you to our 2 hospitals and how blessed we are to have 2 award-winning hospitals serving the citizens of Owasso. That's tremendous. To make our next presentation, I'm proud to welcome Chamber Board Member and the Director of Economic Development for the City of Owasso, Chelsea Levo Ferry. Chelsea?
Thank you, Gary. Today, the Chamber is honored to present a 2020 Community Service Award to our first responders, the City of Owasso Departments of Public Works, Police, and Fire. Every day, pandemic or not, These incredible public servants are on the front lines providing public service, protection, and medical attention to the citizens of Owasso and neighboring communities. First responders take some of the greatest risks associated with an outbreak of an infectious disease like the coronavirus. With every job and every call, these men and women are uncertain of the environment they are entering, yet they accept the personal risks in order to provide public, protective, and life-saving services. We are extremely proud of our first responders from our public works, police, and fire departments here at the City of Owasso. And we extend our gratitude to them for the professional services they provide and the personal sacrifices that they make. It is an honor to present a 2020 Chamber Service Award to the first responders of the City of Owasso. And accepting this award are City Directors Roger Stevens from Owasso Public Works, Chief Scott Chambliss from Owasso Police Department, and Chief David Hurst from the Owasso Fire Department. Thank you, gentlemen.
Chelsea, another great award presentation to some very deserving departments and personnel for helping us go through this critical timeline in our city's history. Thank you for delivering that award. To conclude today's award presentations, I have the privilege of recognizing 4 local educational bodies that collectively, in my opinion, had the most important challenge and responsibility of any business sector in America during the era of COVID-19. That challenge to protect and to educate our most cherished asset, our children and our grandchildren. The magnitude of changes that had to be implemented in order to educate our children was astounding. New schedules, in-person learning, virtual learning, distancing, new safety guidelines, delivery of food and nutritional services, sanitation, transportation, and keeping up with the ever-changing guidelines of the CDC and other healthcare and legislative bodies. All of our school teachers and personnel adapted, persevered, and delivered. Let's not leave anyone out. From school board, administration, teachers, support staff, crossing guards, security, volunteers, it was and continues to be a complete focused effort. It is my honor to present Chamber Community Service Awards to Owasso Public Schools, Rejoice Christian Schools, Tulsa Community College, and Tulsa Tech for their professional and dedicated service. Thanks to all 4 of those entities. I also want to say before we introduce our guest speaker, that this is a year that we have never experienced before. None of us have lived in a pandemic. And so many of our businesses that are listening right now, you've been touched. And there's so many that deserves recognition and awards. I say thank you to all those. And again, I use the word perseverance. We will come through this stronger than ever. As a business community, as a city, county, state, and nation, we will be stronger. It has been difficult, but working together, we have persevered. So thank you to everyone for being a part of the chamber, the meeting, and just getting through this incredible year that we've had. So thank you. Now it's my privilege to welcome to today's keynote speaker, Jim Bridenstine. Jim, I want to say thank you for taking time to be with us today. I appreciate your friendship, excuse me. I appreciate your friendship, your leadership, and your dedication to serving the citizens of Oklahoma. Jim, we have prepared a special introduction for you. It's a video introduction. I hope you enjoy.
The Owasso Chamber of Commerce is honored to have with us today former NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine. Bridenstine began his career in 1998 as a pilot in the United States Navy, flying the E-2C Hawkeye aircraft as part of a carrier air wing with the U.S. Navy in support of the war on drugs with the Naval Reserve. Bridenstine later moved to the F-18 Hornet, flying combat missions in both Iraq and Afghanistan. In 2008, the eventual NASA director was hired on as the executive director of the Tulsa Air and Space Museum, serving in that capacity for 2 years. In 2012, Bridenstine won a seat in Congress representing the citizens of Oklahoma's 1st District, obtaining 63% of the vote. Bridenstine went on to run unopposed in the 2014 election and retained his seat in the U.S. House of Representatives in 2016 as well, totaling 6 years serving the people of Oklahoma in the U.S. House of Representatives. On September 1st, 2017, the White House announced that Bridenstine was President Donald Trump's preferred pick to head NASA, officially joining on April 3rd of 2018.
To be able to usher in, on behalf of the President of the United States, what we believe is a new chapter of renewed American leadership in space with the swearing in of the newest administrator of NASA, Jim Bridenstine.
The new administrator launched a new mission named Artemis to land the first woman and next man on the surface of the moon by 2024.
Our mission to the moon is no longer some far-fetched dream. This is reality.
Bridenstine ushered in a new era at NASA, welcoming a new generation of astronauts that would later launch into space from American soil twice, perform the first all-female spacewalk,
And I'm right behind you. All right.
and keep international cooperation at the forefront of space exploration. Bridenstine joins us today to discuss the fascinating subject of the commercialization of space and what that means for our nation, the world, and for space itself moving forward and into our future. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Bridenstine.
Wow, Gary, that wow, that was amazing. A little more than I ever would have expected and probably deserve. But that was so very nice. Thank you for that wonderful video. And yeah, it's great. I am now back in the great state of Oklahoma, and very happy about that. And I work for a company now called Acorn Growth Companies. I'll just do a little advertisement if that's all right, Gary, what I decided to do and why. When I was the NASA administrator, and Gary alluded to a lot of this, a lot of companies, and in fact, the federal government, we had real challenges with COVID. And we saw firsthand at NASA that a lot of our big prime contractors, you showed the picture of SpaceX launching a rocket, and you also had the SLS rocket, which is Boeing and Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, SpaceX, Blue Origin, these big prime contractors, they're going to survive COVID. What was a bigger challenge was the small and middle market supply chain. Those companies did not have the resources necessary to sustain for the long term. A lot of them were going out of business. And if you don't have that supply chain, if you don't have the lower middle market capabilities, then those big primes are not able to accomplish their mission either. The industrial base of the United States of America at the height of COVID became extremely strained. A lot of companies went out of business. We were scrambling, trying to find private capital for a lot of these companies so that they could keep going, moving forward. Obviously, the Paycheck Protection Program came into play, supported a lot of businesses. For some of them, it was too late. For others, it was a lifesaver. But here's what I recognized at that moment in time. There is a need in this country for private capital to be involved in markets that longer term markets. So as the NASA administrator, I saw firsthand that a lot of the big prime companies, they're focused on quarterly earning statements, which is their job. They need to be focused on that. And then you've got a lot of the small venture class kind of capabilities, startups, innovation, and that's very important as well. But that middle market is where we needed capital and we didn't have it. So this company in Oklahoma called Acorn Growth Companies, and they are focused on raising money and then deploying capital into the small middle market sector of aerospace, defense, and intelligence specifically. So this is a private equity firm. They raise capital from investors, and then they deploy the capital in aerospace, defense, and intelligence specifically. Now, I know a lot about aerospace, defense, and intelligence. Private equity is all new to me. So I'm learning this as I go along. I've been on the job for just a couple of months. I'll tell you, it is absolutely fascinating. I'm so thrilled to be where I am right now. But here's the thing, there's a lot of opportunity out there when it comes to aerospace, defense, and intelligence. Technology is moving very rapidly. The innovation happens in the small and middle market companies. And so I'm just really excited to be at Acorn Growth Companies. And if it's all right, I'll just kind of share, this is about commercial space. I'll share with you kind of where we are on commercial space as a nation, and where we hope to be in 5, 10, even 30 or 50 years. So when we think about low Earth orbit specifically, you guys saw that rocket in the video with the rocket there that you showed had Bob and Doug on board. Those were our 2 astronauts that launched to the International Space Station. For a period of 10 years, we had no access to low Earth orbit with American astronauts. The only way we could get there was to buy seats from the Russians through their Soyuz rocket. I got direction from the president. He said, you're going to launch American astronauts on American rockets from American soil, and we're going to do it by 2020. Yes, sir, that's what we're going to do. So we moved out on that. The point is, what were Bob and Doug going to low Earth orbit for? What were they going to do? Well, they were going to maintain the International Space Station. You saw in the video our first all-female spacewalk, which was important for a lot of reasons, but they were preserving the International Space Station. We are using the International Space Station right now to prove capability that we believe in the future will be very investable from capital markets. So some of those capabilities include, we're going to utilize the International Space Station to create immunizations, for example, to advance immunizations. A lot of people don't realize that the International Space Station itself has been used to create and advance immunizations for salmonella, which people say, how many people die from salmonella? Why do we need an immunization for that? Well, in the United States, not so many. But if you go to Africa or other countries that are not as well off as the United States, it's the 3rd leading cause of death among children. So that can be remedied. So we also invented or advanced an immunization for pneumonia, for example. So these are things that you can do in space using a very valuable resource, microgravity or zero gravity. But it's not just about immunizations, it's about compounding pharmaceuticals in space in a way that you cannot do here on Earth. So we're proving those capabilities out. It's about using microgravity to create, we're using adult stem cells to create human tissue, human organs on the International Space Station. So right now, if you were to take that same stem cell and try to create a human organ here on Earth, the tissue just goes flat because of the gravity well. But if you do it in the microgravity of space, it grows in 3 dimensions. And so microgravity is a very valuable tool for eventually using your own DNA. Gary, we're going to be able to take your own adult skin cells and be able to create your own tissue, so that if you need a transplant of some kind, we're going to in the future be able to provide that using your own genetics, which is going to be transformational for medicine here on Earth. We're also doing things like creating artificial retinas for the human eyeball. And people say, why can't you do that on Earth? Well, in the microgravity of space, you can actually create material that is so thin, it is in fact 1 or 2 atoms thick, which you can't do within the gravity well of Earth. But in the microgravity of space, not only can it be done, but it is being done. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get rid of my phone here. And so when we think about how we're going to go forward in the future, it is about advanced materials. So when we think about that artificial retina for the human eyeball, that is not biological in nature. That is purely advanced material capability, which I think is impressive. Other advanced material capabilities would include things like what we call Z-bland, which is very pristine fiber optics. Fiber optics here on Earth, you can create them and they're very effective, but they're not, the fiber optics are not pure, which means you have to have repeaters. Those repeaters cost a lot of money, and it increased the cost of deploying a fiber optic network. Now here we have, with Z-bland, we have an opportunity to no kidding, have such pristine fiber optic networks that we don't have to have the repeaters, which means you can save a lot of money. So the business case actually closes. Going back to the artificial retina for the human eyeball, imagine launching, a box that fits in the palm of your hand, and in that box are all the materials and all the robotics necessary to create 1,000 artificial retinas. And when those artificial retinas come back to Earth, they're reimbursed by Medicare to the tune of $50,000 to $75,000 a piece. So all of a sudden the business case closes. We can actually have people who have macular degeneration not lose their eyesight. So these are just some of the technologies that we are advancing on the International Space Station. One of my big pushes when I was at NASA was to make sure that we love basic research. NASA is really good at basic research, and we want to continue doing it, and we will continue doing it. But in this particular case, we need to have a better mix of technologies and capabilities to where we're doing the research that will eventually result in investable capability outside of NASA. And that's what we've been focusing on the International Space Station. Now, we now have, you saw Bob and Doug launch on what we call, it's a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket with a Crew Dragon at the top. That was not a NASA purchased, owned, and operated rocket. That was a new business model where NASA partners with private industry, and we say we want to buy a service. We don't want to own and operate the hardware. We want to buy a service. And so that's what we did. We've done that with commercial resupply of the International Space Station with Northrop Grumman and with SpaceX. Now we're doing it. We saw it just there in that video. We're doing it not just resupply, but also crew to the International Space Station with SpaceX and in this case, Boeing. Now the next big step is that International Space Station that's in orbit with all those technologies that are being advanced that we hope in the very near future will be largely investable by private markets. That space station is going to come to the end of its useful life. The question comes next, and I will tell you, the United States of America is not going to build another International Space Station. So what are we going to do? We're going to partner with commercial industry, just like we did for commercial resupply, just like we did for commercial crew to the International Space Station. The next big step is commercial space stations themselves to do all of the activities that I just mentioned are happening in low Earth orbit. And there's so many more. So what we need now is commercial space stations themselves. NASA needs to do public-private partnerships with commercial entities to develop commercial space stations so that our commercial crew and commercial resupply programs can service commercial space stations in all of these areas. The key is for NASA to have numerous customers, but also to have numerous providers that are competing on cost and innovation. So if NASA has multiple providers, whether it's launch or space stations, numerous providers competing on cost and innovation, and those providers are going to get customers that are not, then all of a sudden the cost landscape is fundamentally changed. Costs drive down, access goes up, innovation takes hold. Look at the commercial crew program itself. It's not just amazing that you have a commercial company launching astronauts, but the innovation that went into that vehicle is astonishing. So we think about the miniaturization of electronics. We think about the power density of batteries. We think about the reusability of rockets. I mean, that rocket didn't just launch our astronauts to the International Space Station. It came back and landed. And in a few months later, I was going back to the Kennedy Space Center to watch it launch again. That drives down the cost significantly. Imagine if every time you got on an airplane to fly from Tulsa to Houston or Tulsa, wherever, every time you get on an airplane, if when you land, you have to throw away the airplane. The cost would be so expensive, nobody would fly. Well, that's how we've been doing space travel for all these years. Now we are transforming that. We do that by incentivizing commercial industry to compete on cost and innovation. And that's what that program was all about. So yes, it was important to launch American astronauts on American rockets from American soil. I got that direction loud and clear. There was no question what my job was. What's important is how we do it. And in this case, partnering with commercial industry was critically important. And then how we take the model that we have now proven, how do we take that model and expand it to space stations and, as you saw in the video, the moon. One of my first initiatives as the NASA administrator was, we got to get to the moon quickly. In fact, we want to be on the moon this year, 2021. Well, not with humans necessarily, but with robotics. So I said, let's use the business model that we have for commercial resupply, commercial crew, commercial space stations. Let's use that business model to land on the moon with what we call the commercial lunar payload services. NASA will create payloads that we have scientific need for on the moon. We'll take those payloads and we will hire private companies to deliver those payloads to the surface of the moon. So that program is in full effect right now. And by the end of 2021, it is a very real possibility that we will have the first American landing on the moon since 1972. Now this will be robotic, but we also in the years ahead are going to be landing humans. And we're going fast to achieve all of these things. The business models were critically important to build support from the House of Representatives and the Senate, Republicans, Democrats, both sides of the aisle. We had to get bipartisan support. Those business models were able to get that bipartisan support. We needed to make sure that we have international partners that are involved in these programs as we move forward. So that's what we're doing. We're going to the moon. We're going commercially. We're going with international partners. We're driving down costs. We're increasing access. We're building a space station in orbit around the moon called the Gateway. And we're doing all of these things with a purpose. We're learning how to live and work on another world for long periods of time on the moon. And we're going to take all of that knowledge to Mars. And people say, well, why do you want to go to Mars? What's the value of going to Mars? Well, since you asked, I'll share. So when I was the NASA administrator, a number of critically important discoveries were made, in my view. Number one, we discovered that methane cycles on Mars match the seasons of Mars. That doesn't mean that there's necessarily life on Mars. It could be geological in nature. But the probability of finding life on Mars went up when we made that discovery. Not only did we make that discovery, but Mars is also covered with complex organic compounds. The building blocks for life exist all over Mars. We made that discovery. Now, that is not true on the moon. There are 0 complex organic compounds on the moon, not a one, but they are all over Mars, just like they're all over Earth. So methane cycles matching seasons, complex organic compounds all over. And we also discovered liquid water 12 kilometers under the surface of Mars. We know that Mars has ice, lots of ice. It's got an ice cap just like the Earth. But liquid water 12 kilometers under the surface, significant discovery, because on the Earth, we know wherever there's liquid water, there's life. Is that true on Mars? We don't know, but in my view, we need to go find out. So these are important discoveries. And I would also say, before I got to NASA, there was, spirit and opportunity or curiosity. These rovers had made some amazing discoveries already. Number one, we know that in its northern hemisphere, it had a strong magnetosphere that protected it from the radiation of the sun and the radiation of deep space. It had a thick atmosphere. It had all of the things necessary to be habitable. In fact, it was much like Earth about 3 billion years ago. Now, so what does that mean? That means that while we don't know that Mars was in fact, we know that it was habitable. And we know that today, based on the discoveries we made in the last few years, methane cycles, complex organic compounds, liquid water, all of this stuff conspires to say that it is very possible that we could make a discovery of life on a world that's not ours. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I have to be very careful. I'm not saying that it has happened. I'm saying that if it does happen, it needs to be the United States of America that leads the effort with a coalition of international partners, because if it does happen, it will forever add chapters to science books and history books, and we need to be leading in that effort, in my view. So Gary, if it's all right, I don't know how much time we have. I know we've got maybe 18 minutes left. Is it okay for me to open it up to questions? Do we have a way to do that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Dylan, I jumped in on you. Let me just say yes, and perhaps a couple other questions. Dylan, would you like to answer that for anyone that might want to issue a question, or from our panelists?
Sure, and I will take questions over here in the attendee list. I believe we have a Q&A section as well as a chat. So if you'd like to ask questions, I will ask them in order they are received.
That would be great. And Jim, a couple of things that I would like to ask too, that we've been a part of your conversations and education in recent years. When we look at where we are positioned in a worldwide environment of space, the healthcare and initiatives, that's fantastic. But if we don't pursue space in a military situation, are we in trouble for not pursuing space based on what our traditional adversaries might be doing?
Yeah, 100%. So when I was in the House of Representatives, we passed a bill, and we actually did it in the National Defense Authorization Act. We passed a bill in the House and this was really a couple of folks leading an effort, and I was one of them. It was an effort to create the Space Force. This was long before President Trump existed as President of the United States, but we were pushing the idea that if you look at the Air Force, Air Force is responsible for the air domain, cyber domain, and the space domain. And if you're going to allocate resources to the Air Force to do space, guess what? All those resources are going to go to the air domain. We needed a separate military branch that could advocate for and win resources for space. And I'll tell you why. Now, when I say we passed it in the House. The bill, it got 344 bipartisan votes. It went to the Senate and it never went anywhere from there. President Trump obviously jumped on that and really pushed for the Space Force, which is now in existence. Here's what people need to understand. And I cannot stress this enough. And we've only got 16 minutes left, but I'm going to do the best I can. Space is essential to everything we do as a civilization in the United States of America. And I know that, for example, there are bankers that are sponsors of this event. Every banking transaction in the United States of America is dependent on a timing signal from GPS. In other words, if we lose that GPS signal, we're going to have we're going to lose banking for a period of time in this country. Now, it's also true that the terrestrial wireless network that we all use, our cell phones, of course, dependent on a timing signal from GPS. If we lose that timing signal, terrestrial wireless networks won't work. When we think about the regulation of flows of electricity on the power grid, the regulation of flows of electricity on the power grid dependent on a timing signal from GPS. So if you lose GPS, you lose banking, you lose wireless networks, you lose the grid. This is an existential threat to the United States of America. It is not by accident that Russia and China are both developing anti-satellite missiles and co-orbital anti-satellite satellites. In other words, satellites that are flying in formation with other satellites. They're developing that capability while at the same time building their own GPS constellations. China, of course, has the Beidou system. Russia has the GLONASS system. So it is very naive to suggest that space is a sanctuary or that it is safe. It is not. The technologies that are proliferating in space, jamming, spoofing, hacking, dazzling. Dazzling is using energy, whether it's to blind a satellite or, no kidding, damage permanently a satellite. So these are very real threats to our existence here on Earth. I will also say, when you think about space, the way we communicate, we've talked about direct TV, dish network, internet broadband from space, XM radio, over the horizon communications for the Department of Defense. In other words, how do you get decisions from national command authorities for troops on the ground, those kind of things. Communications critically important, dependent on space. Navigation, we talked about GPS. It's not just a timing signal, it's also how we navigate. We think about communication, navigation, how we produce food. Right now, we're using space to increase crop yields, reduce water usage, preserve nitrates in the soil. We're going to feed more of the world than ever before because of our space-based capabilities. So how we produce food, how we produce energy cleanly from space, we can detect greenhouse gas emissions, whether it's a leak from drilling for energy or whether it's a leak from transporting energy. We detect that from space very quickly. We can then turn that around to the private company. They can remedy the situation, and then they don't get fined by the EPA. So how we produce energy, how we predict weather, critically important. Of course, for Oklahoma, 80% of the data that gives us our weather forecast comes from space. So we've got to make sure that that data is secure. And of course, how we do disaster relief, national security and defense, and of course, climate. We have to understand climate. And the only way to really be good at understanding climate is to understand it from space. So these are just some of the areas where space is critically important. It's going to become more important day in and day out. But it is absolutely true that the enemies of the United States know how vulnerable space is. They know how dependent we are on space, and they're moving quickly to deny it if we end up in a conflict. We have to make sure as a nation that we are making investments. And this, by the way, none of this is NASA. NASA is a tool of diplomacy. It is not a tool of military. We are not in the Department of Defense. I just want to be clear. I say we, I'm not at NASA anymore. But it is important to say that it is becoming more and more challenging in space from a national security perspective. The enemies understand why that is. I would say the American public, you know, I hear these late night comedians laughing about the Space Force. If only they knew how dumb they were. I can't say that strongly enough. It is infuriating to me to hear them make fun of something that is so important to our national security. So yeah, I'm a big believer in the Space Force and space security. Going back, if you look at all the elements of national power, the goal has to be that we make investments so that China and Russia and any others, that they know that if they make investments to denying us space, that those investments will be in vain. And if we can get to a position where they're not making those investments, then we don't have to make those investments. But if we are not making those investments, we can guarantee that they're going to continue to advance in that area. And so, yes, we have to be vigilant. We have to be thoughtful about how we move forward and how we allocate resources in that area. It is also important to remember, when we think about all the elements of national power, those of us who have been in the military, the training we have, that we use an acronym called DIME. Each letter represents an element of national power: diplomatic power, information power, military power, economic power. So NASA, we play on the diplomacy side. We have agreements with over 700 countries around the world. I should say we have over 700 agreements with countries around the world for activities in space. We've had astronauts from 19 different countries on the International Space Station, experiments, 103 different countries on the International Space Station. This is an amazing tool of diplomacy. This is why NASA is not inside the Department of Defense, because then we could not be this tool of diplomacy that we are for our country. So diplomacy is where NASA plays. And if we do it right, then all of these other things on the national security side will be less relevant. And by that, what I mean is, if you have Russians and Chinese and all of our international partners in space with humans, with dozens of space stations in orbit around the Earth, doing these things that are going to transform the human condition here on Earth, the probability of them wanting to destroy space goes way down. And so that's, in my view, we have to make sure that we are using the tool of diplomacy to prevent what we all hope never happens, which is a war that extends into space. So diplomacy matters. The information piece matters. We think about Apollo. You know, we celebrated the Apollo 50th anniversary when I was at NASA. We had 500,000 people come to the National Mall. They lit up the Washington Monument with a Saturn V rocket. It was the coolest thing ever. 500,000 people on the mall in Washington, D.C., and they were all celebrating something good. Like, I've been on the mall lots of times, and it's never happy. I'm just telling you, people are there to protest. Well, in this case, you had 500,000 people that were there to celebrate something good. That is that information power. And by the way, that information power goes beyond just showing national, demonstrating our economic prowess or our technological prowess. It's a step further than that. When Ronald Reagan announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, which got poo-pooed as the Star Wars program, when he announced that, he hardly invested any money into the Star Wars program, hardly anything. And yet it was what did the Russians or the Soviets do at the time? They invested tons of money to try to counteract the Star Wars program. Why? They did so because they believed we could do it. They believed it because just 13 years prior to that, they saw American astronauts walking on the moon. Not just one mission, but 6 missions back to back. 12 people walked on the surface of the moon, all of them Americans. They believed that if we thought we were going to do something, they believed we could do it. Now, the reality is, everybody criticized and said, that's not technically feasible, it's too expensive. And all those arguments were probably true at the time, but it didn't matter, because the people who were a threat to the United States believed we could do it. And that did matter. And it ultimately was a piece, it was a small piece of the the Soviet Union eventually collapsing. So diplomacy and information, these are tools of national power that I think are critically important where NASA plays. Of course, the E in DIME is economics. We play huge there, especially as we go forward. Space is becoming democratized. It's becoming commercialized. It's impacting our lives every day in ways that most people don't realize it. So there's a huge element there to play economically. But because of that, it has become a threat. It has come under threat. And because of that, we have to have the M in DIME, which is military power. So when we have to think holistically about the security of this nation. It's diplomatic power, it's information power, it's military power, it's economic power. And all those things are going to be necessary for us to preserve and move forward in space.
Jim, thank you.
A lot of time.
No, we still have a few minutes. Dylan, did you have a question? And Jim, we might ask if you could give as brief an answer as possible to these. Do we have additional questions?
Yes, sir. I actually did have 2 questions. So the first one is from an anonymous asker who just says, do you think we'll revisit any of the Apollo sites on the moon?
I think one day for sure. And I'm looking forward to it. You know, one of the things that I always got asked as the NASA administrator is, do you really believe the moon landings were real? You know, just so everybody knows, the answer to that question is yes, the moon landings were real. They were not staged. And you know they were real because when they happened, the Soviets congratulated us on each and every one of them. Had a lot to gain, have been faked. And yes, so those Apollo sites are still there. We actually have an around the moon, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter that has, you know, visited and taken pictures of where those sites are. And yeah, looking forward to getting back there and really establishing the protection of those sites. Look, when we go to the moon next time, we're going to stay, and we need to make sure that those heritage sites are protected.
Yes. Dylan, another question?
Yes, our other question is, thanks, Jim, for your ongoing passion for space. Knowing that you have a common sense perspective and share sensible fiscal perspectives on the skyrocketing, no pun intended, federal debt deficit, can you elaborate more with any suggestions on how we can most responsibly allocate resources towards additional investment in space, more debt, tax increases, eliminate other programs with a lesser return, etc.?
Yeah, that's easy.
Yeah, so no, it's a very important question. I mean, the question is, what is it that a nation would invest in? And I think these public-private partnerships have proven themselves to really drive down costs through innovation and competition. How they're structured matters. And if right, we get the benefit of prestige at the same time we create these markets. For example, because NASA invested in SpaceX for both commercial resupply and commercial crew, we went from having, when the space shuttles retired in 2011, we had 0% of the market share for commercial launch, 0%. And that sustained for, I don't know, 5 years. We had hardly any of the market share for commercial launch. Now the United States of America has 70%. So the president, as you guys know, President Trump, my old boss, he was very focused on the deficit. And I want to say deficit. I'm talking about the trade deficit, not the fiscal deficit now. He's focused on the trade deficit and the balance of payments. And how do we make sure that we're exporting things? Well, here's a perfect example of the American taxpayer made an investment, and now all of a sudden we're getting all of this business from abroad to come into the United States of America. That's a smart and important investment, and it's transformational. So how we do that, I think, really matters. But ultimately, the goal has to be the United States of America makes an investment as a customer. Sometimes we have to be a tenant customer at first, and then we slowly creep back from that, and it sustains on its own. And then we can make the investments for which there's not yet a commercial marketplace. For example, right now, what we're doing at the moon and eventually onto Mars. We can do those things for which there's not yet a commercial marketplace, but we have to put into place the programs and the incentives for commercial to follow and in fact be side by side with us when we go, and then ultimately to take over when we go. So at the moon, for example, precious metals, platinum group metals, metals that are necessary for all kinds of national security purposes. Water ice is hydrogen, it's oxygen, it's water to drink for humans that go to the moon, it's air to breathe, oxygen, and hydrogen itself is rocket fuel. So you've got hundreds of millions of tons of rocket fuel on the south pole of the moon. Let's utilize it. Let's commercialize it. Let's make it available. And let's use that for what comes next. So there are, I think, a lot of commercial opportunities out there. But look, if we're thinking about things from a government owned and operated perspective, then we're thinking way too small, because then it is exactly as you said, it is a zero-sum game. And in that zero-sum game, the only way to do more is to tax more or borrow more. If instead we have private markets that jump in and capitalize these capabilities, then it takes the burden off the government. Initially, the government has to play a role. The goal is for the government to get out of that role. So I think there's a lot of ways that, as NASA is transforming, I think this should be a model for how we transform the federal government in a lot of areas to push things more into the commercial domain.
Jim, that's just wonderful information. Thank you so much for your sharing today. Dylan, I'm going to ask you as a courtesy, is there anything that anyone had another question or you want to finalize, or are we ready to close?
No, sir. I don't believe we have any other questions. There is nothing else I have to share, so I believe we're ready to close.
Well, Jim, the great film that you saw, the introduction, was prepared by Dylan Watkins here with our chamber office. I thought that was a wonderful job in presentation, and I wanted to do that. It was a 4-minute introduction, and I know that just drives former political figures crazy to think you have that much time. But what you've done for us locally, how you represented us in DC, how you've gone to NASA to lead our nation's space program, how you've interacted with our nation's president to give your ideas and direction is phenomenal. And now you come back to your home state with Acorn Growth Companies. We just wish you the best of success. We're proud of what you've done. We're proud to call you a friend. And in conclusion of today's meeting, I want to take just one more minute to say thanks to our sponsors. Anyone associated with chambers knows it's a complement between chamber members and members with sponsorships. Chambers do not stay open without sponsors. So again, I want to represent and say thank you to our presenting sponsor, RCB Bank, our gold sponsors, Macy's Fulfillment Center, Merrill Media Group, Oklahoma Natural Gas, Tulsa Community College. A special thanks to our virtual host sponsor, Tulsa Tech. And I want to list our silver sponsors, valuable investments, each one of these. Thank you. Thanks to Bama Foods, Central Bank of Oklahoma, Central Plains Cement Company, Christian Brothers Automotive, Classic Chevrolet, Coldwell Banker Select, Cox Communications, Centergy, First Baptist Church, Limestone Construction, Loving Eye Care, Prosperity Bank, Public Service Company of Oklahoma, Rejoice Christian Schools, and TTCU Federal Credit Union. To all of our sponsors, thank you. To our members, our board members, our ambassadors, stay tuned for future announcements on upcoming meetings. A week from today will be our next monthly luncheon. Be looking for those announcements and plan on attending. At this time, we will conclude the meeting. Again, Mr. Bridenstine, thank you.
Thank you.
We will conclude. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.